The public imagination fixates on the kinetic, the missile silo, the launch-on warning posture. This is a deliberate misdirection. While legacy media projects images of ICBMs, a far more effective attack vector is being normalized, and its primary delivery system is silence. RUSI and CSIS threat models do not prioritize a missile exchange. Their focus is on the systemic fragility of the West's data infrastructure. The final, rational lever for a state facing economic annihilation, as documented in cases like the U.S. blockade of Venezuela, is not symmetrical warfare. It is asymmetric. The target is not a city, it is the signal. Specifically, the undersea fiber optic cables that carry over 95% of all global data and financial transactions. A simultaneous severance at key choke points is not a conventional act of war. It is an act of systemic liquidation. A secondary vector is satellite blinding. A targeted disruption of GPS and communication satellites doesn't create an explosion. It creates a blackout. No timing signals for stock exchanges. No transaction verifications. No liquidity. This creates the blind Leviathan, a hyper-leveraged financial system, one where regulators are actively softening capital rules for banks, is suddenly deprived of its senses. It cannot see prices, it cannot hear orders, it cannot verify its own solvency. In the absence of data, the entire system's mathematical value defaults to zero. This is the silent vector, a direct pathway from economic sanctions to systemic collapse. The Ukraine conflict is not a war of choice. It is a solvency event. To understand the motive, you must erase the media narrative and analyze it as a balance sheet problem. When a superpower uses its economic dominance to engineer a collapse, as seen with the U.S. blockade against Venezuela, the target state is pushed into a national liquidity crisis. Its survival is on a timer. The initial kinetic response, the conventional invasion, was a high-cost attempt to break this economic siege. However, according to analysis from RUSI, this conventional war quickly became a severe domestic liability. It accelerates the drain on state solvency, creating a negative feedback loop. The war meant to solve the economic crisis becomes the primary accelerant of that same crisis. This is the strategic trap. Economic warfare forces a conventional military response. The cost of that response drains the state's remaining solvency, making it weaker. This weakness forces a pivot. When you cannot win conventionally and are facing economic annihilation, the strategic calculus becomes brutally simple. You abandon the symmetric game entirely. The final lever is not more tanks. It is an asymmetric attack against the aggressor's most critical vulnerability. This isn't anger, it's a mathematical certainty. The motive is survival, and the pathway is a pivot from a losing conventional war to a potentially winning asymmetric one. The strategic calculus has inverted. Analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, or ROSI, quantifies this shift. A state-of-the-art main battle tank is a kinetic asset valued at $5 million. A first-person view drone, capable of delivering a payload that neutralizes that same tank, costs $500. This is not warfare. It is arbitrage, a 10,000 to 1 cost-benefit ratio. This phenomenon is clinically termed the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting systemic disruption has collapsed. This same asymmetric logic is the blueprint for financial retaliation. Why engage in a symmetric, high-cost kinetic conflict when a small, state-sponsored cell can execute a strategic attack on a hyper-leveraged financial market for a fraction of the cost, achieving systemic paralysis from within? Systemic attack vectors are not deployed untested. Before a primary target is engaged, the doctrine is refined in what strategists at CSIS refer to as proxy laboratories. These are carefully selected regions, geopolitical gray zones, where new models of economic warfare can be pressure tested in a live environment. The objective is not conquest, but data acquisition, to measure the precise failure point of a nation-state's social and financial cohesion. The U.S. blockade against Venezuelan oil exports serves as a foundational case study. As documented, this action was designed to induce economic collapse. From a strategic perspective, this is not merely foreign policy, it is a field experiment. It provides a blueprint for how to methodically dismantle a state's economy, pushing it into a corner where its response matrix is severely limited. The data harvested from this collapse calibrates future operations against more resilient targets. While larger conflicts like the war in Ukraine serve as a public warning of kinetic escalation for powers like Australia, the real work is happening below that threshold. Analysts at RUSI note that emergent instability in Western-aligned nations, from Canada to South Africa, is viewed through this lens. These are not isolated domestic crises. They are identified as potential staging grounds, symptoms of a system being probed for weaknesses. These are the gray zones where financial and cyber attack vectors can be tested with plausible deniability. The purpose of these laboratories is to perfect a terrifying equation. By observing and engineering state failures in the periphery, superpowers calculate the exact kinetic cost required to force a target's hand. The final lever is not an invasion. It is to make an asymmetric, systemic financial counterattack the target's only rational, mathematically predictable move. The gray zone is where the trigger conditions for global financial warfare are being finalized. The nuclear command doctrine of launch on warning is not theory. It is active protocol. It dictates that if early warning systems detect an incoming strategic missile launch, retaliation must be initiated before the incoming warheads arrive and destroy friendly launch capability. The decision window, according to RUSI analysts, is measured in minutes. This protocol creates a systemic vulnerability. Its logic is entirely dependent on the integrity of radar and satellite data. It was designed for a Cold War scenario where the primary threat was a physical, detectable missile launch. The modern asymmetric vector, however, is not kinetic. It is digital. A cyber attack does not need to destroy a silo. It only needs to blind the radar or spoof the satellite feed. By injecting false data or simply executing a signal denial, an adversary creates what CSIS strategists term the fog of digital war. The commander is now forced into a zero-sum choice with zero reliable data. Are the screens dark because of a system malfunction, or because the enemy's first strike has already decapitated the early warning network? The launch on warning protocol forces a single, rational conclusion. Assume the worst. Fear, not fact, becomes the trigger. A state facing economic annihilation, like the scenario detailed in reports on the U.S. blockade of Venezuela, has the motive. This doctrine provides the mechanism. The kinetic cost is outsourced to the defender's own automated response. It is a terrifyingly direct pathway from a financial blockade to a solvency crisis in the global order itself. The normalization of economic warfare forces a mathematical certainty. CSIS analysts confirm global regulators are deliberately softening bank capital rules, converting the Western financial system from a commercial utility into a strategic liability. This is not a policy error. It is the pre-positioning of a systemic vector for attack. When a state, such as Venezuela, faces total economic blockade, the rational calculus shifts. Conventional responses are foreclosed. According to RUSI doctrine, asymmetric escalation becomes the only viable pathway for national survival. The final lever is not a missile. It is a direct attack on the aggressor's most fragile systemic dependency. Therefore, the next phase is not the kinetic attack, but the calibration shot. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a targeted, attribution-impossible logistics paralysis at a Tier 1 U.S. container port. A 48 to 72-hour glitch in the crane and container management system, costing billions. This is not the war. It is a non-kinetic demonstration of capability, designed to measure the financial pain tolerance of the system before the solvency crisis is fully triggered.